Get busy living or get busy dying. Red, The Shawshank Redemption. The Daily Grind, Book 4, Chapter 196, because I do not have any sense of how to number chapters. A few years ago, James had been having a really bad day at work. Stuck working hours that mostly served to make sure he was awake when normal businesses were closed, and that made sure he missed his weekly D&D game. In a sentence that would be considered by future historians to be an understatement, he would later admit that his day had turned out okay. A year after the night that he discovered that sometimes the back stairwell at work went to a pocket dimension full of hostile office supplies and warped beige landscapes, James had gone from sharing the secrets with a few friends to sharing the secret with 100-ish people he had rescued from the depths of the place they had collectively decided to call Officium Mundi. A year after that, and the group of survivors and rescues had expanded and alloyed. No longer a collection of a couple dozen traumatized humans, they had hired new, less traumatized humans, and picked up a batch of rescued, very traumatized officium creations called Camercondas. They were vaguely snake-shaped, had cameras for faces, and were mostly made of Cat5 cable. James wished that he had been clever enough to come up with that name for their species, but it was somebody else's fault. A year after that, lasting through more pain than was reasonable, and they were an organization that explored and safeguarded 4 different spaces like Officium Mundi. They had members from between 8 and 11 species, depending on how you counted engineers. They had ambitions to change the world and build something better, kinder, and stronger than humanity had ever seen before. And now, after surviving more than he probably had any right to, James stepped out of a hot and dusty August afternoon and walked into the cool lobby of the central hub of the Order of Endless Rooms, and yawned because 3 years and change hadn't been enough to teach him better sleeping habits. Also, he'd sort of started relying on his friend Sarah for naps. James and Sarah could share sleep across a magical bond forged by one of the dungeons they knew about. It was a very silly zero-sum power that resisted any attempt to exploit it, but that was fine, because Sarah could work while she was asleep these days, and James could pretend he was unbound by the mortal responsibility to go to bed at a reasonable hour. Next to the door, someone with more sense than James had set up a bank of small lockers. Initially, he'd been against anything that reminded him of a garbage high school experience, but he had come around when he realized how handy it was to have a dedicated place to throw stuff, and also that the Order was using it as an impromptu mail system. He was also pretty sure that someone in the research department had folded the fabric of space here, because everyone had a locker, but there was no way that this 15-foot-long bank contained 200-plus cubbies. "Mornin'." James fumbled the word a little as he tried to offer a polite greeting to the 2 high school interns who were also at the lockers. Almost in unison, the 2 kids looked out the door he was swinging shut behind him, and then back to James. There used to be a large plate glass window for this joke, but the Order had replaced them with something more defensible after an unwanted fight had come to their doorstep. "It's 2 p.m.?" one of the kids asked. "Yeah, hey, hang on," James said with a smile. "Shouldn't you guys be in school?" "It's also August," the other one said, not quite syncing up to James's joke. "We're on vacation." "Wow, I really overslept then." James nodded happily, cracking the door to his locker when he located it, and instantly seeing a folded note sitting right at the front. "Huh," he muttered, picking it up as the student interns more or less went back to what they were doing. The Order's interns were smart, capable, and many of them had survived things that no child ever should have had to have gone through, but they were still teenagers, and trading banter with the adults wasn't what a lot of them wanted to do, even if the adults were wizards. James didn't begrudge them that. He'd been there. So instead, he checked the note that was left for him. "Got dragged into nonsense with L. Postpone until tonight?" Signed, A. It had a series of hearts doodled on it. James gnawed on his lip as he frowned at it for a handful of seconds. The abject refusal to sign this properly meant it could have been either Anesh or Alana, and the presence of hearts changed that assessment in no way, because both of his partners could be incredibly sappy at times. He was more confused as to what was being postponed, and he racked his brain trying to figure out if he had forgotten an appointment. Like most members of the Order, James had a magical augmentation that made his short-term memory a lot sharper. It did nothing here. He came up empty. Well, if they were okay postponing until tonight, and for some reason leaving notes instead of just texting him like a normal person, then James wasn't going to complain. He gave the note a smile and set it off to the side of his locker before shoving his bag in and turning to head deeper into the lair. They called the building the Lair, with a capital L, because of course they did. James! A young woman's voice caught up to him as he headed toward the converted warehouse space that they used as a briefing and intelligence collection room. He turned with a smile, spreading his arms. Momo, just who I was looking for, James said cheerfully. This was technically a lie, but since his de facto role in the Order was as a freelance problem solver, he could claim to be looking for anyone at any time. This saved him a lot of brain space that normally got dedicated to social anxiety. Momo was the Order's ritual division leader, and the reason that divisions were all R names on purpose and not by coincidence. She liked the moniker of War Witch, a title that would probably not be making it into the official records, but was sort of backed up by the score of enchanted pencils that orbited her head at any given moment in rotating lazy loops. At a sturdy 5'7", she was down about half a foot of height on James, both in terms of actual height and currently hair length. Or at least, she had been. Nice tank girl look, James complimented her hairstyle. Momo tended toward goth styles, and the half-shaved head, half-long hair thing she was going for probably qualified. James didn't know anything about goth styles, so he would believe whatever somebody told him. Didn't you have a mohawk last night? In a different color? He asked her. What? Momo blinked and ran a hand up to her head, getting her fingers tangled in the longer brown hair. Oh right, we found a picture frame in the office that can grow hair. I figured I'd shake things up. Officium Mundi was always a roulette wheel when it came to how useful a magic item would be. Though, James was now actually considering cutting his ponytail back if the option to regrow it instantly was just sitting there. He didn't say that. Instead, he said, Neat, what's up? And let Momo say her piece. People around here had been a lot busier lately, so he was trying to be better about getting to the point and saving the long meandering conversations for long meandering conversation night. And that wasn't for a few hours yet. Bunch of stuff. Momo clapped her hands together exuberantly, the bathrobe she was wearing swishing around her. You'll probably hear half of this from Reed later, but whatever. The alchemy project has more data points. Turns out the potions don't actually give a shit who stirs them, but they might have different species-to-species effects. Also, literally no one can tell if it matters if you use magical materials, which I object to. Noted, James nodded solemnly. I'll add your objection to the record. Sure. Momo narrowed her eyes at him before continuing. Anyway, I think I got a memory file made for how I make red totems, but no one wants to test it. Something about brain damage. So if you want to test it, it's around. Also, do you have a list of all the green orb effects currently on the lair? I think something is screwing with one of my item tests. Item tests like you're making an item, or item tests like you're trying to identify an item through testing? The second one, Momo confirmed, and James felt a small rush of perspective as he realized he legitimately had to ask what the source of magic item was. Like, do we have any orbs that screw with distance? Momo asked. James looked at her with eyebrows raised so far they threatened to abandon his forehead. Then he looked down at the floor as if he could somehow see through the material and back up to her. We have 8 basements? He sarcastically asked. I know about the basements, thank you. Momo threw her arms up. You're no help. I'm going to go find Anesh. Anesh keeps lists. She spun away, ducking between a human and a cameraconda who were also waiting to talk to James. There's a list in the shared server, James called after her. Momo, you have a... She's gone. Okay. He sighed as his friend vanished around the corner. Also, there's even odds Anesh isn't actually here. She'll figure it out. Hey, what's up, Sonny? He turned to the cameraconda, who was patiently waiting to address him. Frequency of sunlight bobbed her head in greeting, the green and blue cabling that made up her body shifting with an organic fluidity that didn't look quite natural or quite artificial. The boxy security camera that the cabling wrapped around that made up her face and head was entirely artificial looking, but even so, everyone was used to the way cameracondas looked by now, so it just didn't seem out of place to him. The arms she was wearing were kind of new. Well, new in quotes. They were a few months in development, and there were a few of the basement occupying engineers that kept tinkering with and refining them every couple of weeks. This current iteration was still a kind of strapped-on backpack. It plugged into the skulljack cameracondas normally use to connect to speakers and speak with. Their normal biology was not exactly great for enunciation. They had a little more in the way of fine manipulation now, though they still didn't have the same capacity to lift or throw that even an out-of-shape human could do. "I have brought you an interview subject," Frequency of Sunlight declared to James with a proud tone to her digital voice. James glanced up from the cameraconda to the somewhat confused face of the human who had followed her over. "Did he know what he was getting into, or did you just kidnap somebody who was passing by?" he asked. Frequency of Sunlight leaned back at close to her full height of 4 feet, her serpent body looking almost contrite as she brought one of her manipulator hands around to her chest in an offended gesture. "I would never do that." "You literally did do that," James protested with a laugh. "Last month, you brought back a kid who got folded into the youth group activities." "He followed me," Sunny protested. "I did not kidnap him. He was incidentally kidnapped. He became kidnapped. Kidnapping occurred, irrespective of my involvement." "Excellent passive voice," James said, reaching out a hand to shake with a new arrival. "Hi, James. Nice to meet you." The man, who looked about James's age, somewhere in his mid-30s, took a hand off the heavy courier bag he was wearing to reach out a tanned grip and meet the handshake. "Miguel, and I am supposed to be here, but not for an interview, I think? Probably? Man, I don't know, I'm supposed to be doing a materials test. I feel like I just fell into Narnia." "We don't have satyrs," Frequency of Sunlight said idly, slithering away and leaving James to field this one. James snorted a laugh. "Yet," he appended. "We don't have satyrs yet. I'm not going to say we're working on it, but I wouldn't say it's off the table. Also, you're probably looking for either Karen Ward or Jake Redding. Around that small corner, take the elevator up. Someone will help you from there." Miguel looked where James was pointing, and then slowly turned his attention back to him. "This is a 1-story building," he said. "Welcome to Narnia," James answered simply, reaching behind himself to open the door to the briefing room. "Have a good one. I gotta get back to what I was doing." Yeah, sure." The man was leaning now, like he could somehow ambush the elevator and maybe make it less concerning if he snuck up on it. James gave him a jaunty wave and slipped through the door he had cracked open, softly closing it behind himself and letting out a sigh. He was here today to mostly signal the end of his small vacation and to help out with a building renovation project that was a bit short-handed, and he hadn't expected to already be getting ambushed himself with rogue problems. Potion brewing and totem making, magic items and duplication rituals, trying to make friends with secret government agencies and trying to rehabilitate ex-cultists, building a culture, building a city, making a place for species most humans on Earth didn't know existed. It was really overwhelming sometimes. James huffed out a small breath, closing his eyes as he let his hand linger on the door's handle, just taking in the cool air of this back room, dry and sheltered from the sweltering sun. "It's good to be back," he smiled to himself as he spoke out loud. "You have been on your so-called vacation for 2 days, 6 hours, and 18 minutes, a voice from directly next to James informed him in a tone like a ballpoint pen scribbling over sheet paper. "Jesus!" James barked out the epithet in a drawn-out voice. "Planner, we talked about this." Next to James, technically using one of the desks that they had in here, the manifested form of an infomorph narrowed its central eye at him. Planner, the assignment living in the minds of about half the Order at this point, was very friendly once you got past their stoic exterior and the fact that their manifested form looked like a Rorschach test and an octopus might have had a kid at some point. Tentacles that wove from nowhere into intricate patterns, large eyes suspended by ghostly webbings of membrane between their limbs, and oddly precise yet still organic-looking manipulators on the ends of their arms. Some people found Planner unsettling until they got used to being around the person who essentially occupied the role of the Order's designated arcane secretary and learned how they were as a person. Some people found Planner hot, until they got used to being around the person who had essentially occupied the role of the Order's designated arcane secretary, and learned how they were as a person. "We did talk about this," Planner agreed in their scribed voice. "It was among many things we discussed, including the issue of your inability to take proper breaks and the concern of burnout." They rotated an arm toward him in a spiral pattern that started nowhere and ended with their ephemeral blue tentacle holding an elegantly drawn graph. "I have taken the opportunity to collect data on the rate of Order members who have made errors due to lack of downtime. Since you are no longer on vacation, perhaps—" "Being in the building doesn't make me not on vacation," James protested quickly. "I've got at least 10 minutes before I'm officially working." He held up his hands, hoping that if he was going to spontaneously manifest any magic in his life, it would be now, and it would be some kind of mystical ward against PowerPoint presentations. Planner made, taking a note into a single uttered sound. "I will speak to you then," they said. James nodded politely at the threat and scurried away, rapidly putting distance between himself and the well-intentioned ghost octopus. He passed through the arrayed desks and standing whiteboards, nodding and exchanging snappy greetings with the other people who were back here. This space wasn't usually full of life like some of the basements or the dining area were, but it was often occupied by at least a couple people. The group of 2 humans, a Camerconda, a thing disguised as a human, and a dragon-esque shape made out of office supplies roughly the size of a wolf, looking over photographs of a mountain slope and spreadsheets of gear weights, wasn't exactly common, but it was something that just happened in this place. People were here a lot, planning runs, analyzing patterns, making the process of exploring and delving dungeons as effective and safe as possible. Because it wasn't really safe. Dungeons were dangerous, and people got hurt. James would say it was basically a miracle that nobody had died on a delve yet, but it wasn't. It was half miracle and half the result of the fact that they took things seriously, and they didn't fuck around, even when they were kind of fucking around. The Order of Endless Rooms was, in a lot of ways, the custodian of the places they found. It was a fine line to walk. On the one hand, there is an entire detailed section in the operations manual about how they weren't a conspiracy, helpfully titled, "We Are Not a Conspiracy." On the other hand, once you were actually handed phenomenal cosmic power, it was really hard to justify telling random people about it. Because no matter who you told, no matter who you trusted, if you made that information public, then you were, intentionally or not, effectively telling everyone. Every person, every ideology, every government and military and church and corporation, everyone that all evidence pointed to as being exactly the wrong people to trust with that kind of power. James wanted to live in a world where everyone had small magics, where life was bolstered by household dungeon tech and important work got done aided by spellcraft. And a lot of the Order agreed. So they spread around power whenever they could. They shared their cures for cancer as often as they had them available. They escorted non-combatants through dungeons to unlock spell slots. They brought wonders out of dangerous places and worked on how to turn them into a utopia that everyone could live in. But they still lived in a world where they would be outnumbered if 3 nearest cities combined their police departments, and the police departments had more grenade launchers than the Order did. And there was a convincing argument for not giving those people more ways to commit violence. It was worth noting that more grenade launchers didn't mean the only grenade launchers. The Order had grenade launchers too. They'd sort of ended up as the custodians also of a small city in Tennessee. Current population, 20 or so Order members, several hundred raccoons, and a few thousand necromantic asphalt constructs. It was an ongoing project, but they'd looted the police stations, among other things. He cut his thoughts off as he got to the desk where he had stacked a bunch of stuff earlier and grabbed the book from the middle of a pile of similar books. It was a text on feng shui that was both hilariously over-prosaic in places and shockingly detailed in a much more useful way when it came to the effect that angles and lines in rooms had on human emotion. James had gotten really into reading stuff like this. Stuff about how the world everyone lived in was actually built, and how it fed back to the changing way people behaved and thought. For a long time, James had been a fiction-only kind of person, but these days he read a lot about cities and transportation networks and small design choices. It helped that he wanted to build his own city and fold in the smartest ideas humanity had ever come up with, next to the best magics that he and his people had unearthed. Tucking the book into one of the expansive pockets of his cargo shorts, James fought off the desire to go sit in on the winter's climb planning session just for fun, and headed for the exit. The door on the other wall, though, partly so he could get to the stairs faster, and also partly because it gave him the best opportunity to avoid being chastised by Planner any farther. It didn't quite work. "Avoid being surprised," Planner called over to him in their dry voice. James was still processing that, raising his eyebrows as he opened the door, and then stifling a yelp as he came face to face with Nate, the man having been about to open the door from the other side. He gave a silent thank you in Planner's direction as he smoothed his reaction out to a steady breath. "Oh good, you're here," Nate said bluntly. The broad man, ostensibly their head chef, but realistically also the one who was half in charge of their intelligence arm, stepped back and fell in next to James as he walked out of the room. "I need to clear something up with you," he stated in a gruff voice. Nate was shorter, older, and heavier than James, and sort of the definition of stocky, with his thickly muscled arms and chest. He was bald, though James hadn't seen him without a thin black cap on for some time, and he was tattooed on almost every patch of open skin that wasn't his face. James had never looked too closely at the tattoos either, but Nate kept getting more done, so he assumed they were well loved. He was also hilariously blunt, and was so against small talk that a lot of people thought he was outright mean. He wasn't exactly, but he also wasn't someone it was easy to comfortably hang out and chat with. "What's up?" James asked, also fond of getting to the point himself. "We gonna be having more people or dogs who have fur allowed in the kitchen? Because I'm gonna need something to deal with that," Nate stated. "I'm not gonna fucking ban anyone yet. And when I say anyone, I mean Kika, because the little shit keeps sneaking in to take food. But I don't know, make me a magic item that keeps fur out of food." Nodding slightly in time with Nate's words, James took a sharp tangent when he opened his mouth. "Would something that keeps hair out be useful for that? Like, fur is just hair, right? Or is this going to be a magical semantics issue?" He trailed off. "Don't care, don't have a hair problem," Nate pointed out. "Fur, focus." James focused, but on the wrong thing. "Right, hey, Kika, I get. Why did you say dogs? Do we have dogs around here?" "Your dog is around here," Nate barked out. "The giant white one that sheds everywhere, and who also keeps sneaking into my kitchen to steal food. Somehow." "I think what I'm hearing is that we should get a small snack shelf or something outside the kitchen. Baked goods, fruit, maybe finger sandwiches, just keep that stocked throughout the day." Nate took a deep breath, pressing his eyelids shut before answering. "We can do that. But also, your dog, in my kitchen." Honestly, I'm not even sure why Aberdeen is here, though I guess if she's smart enough to sneak into the kitchen for food. "And get into the walk-in." James pursed his lips appreciatively. "And open a heavy fridge door. Yeah, that's clever. I guess she's actually learning faster, which is pretty much what Alana expected, but this is also kind of cool to see happening in real time. Anyway, I'll look into the magic fur remover." Nate's hand clamped onto his arm as James went to open the stairwell to one of the basements. "No, stop." He shook his head with a stern look. "Why is your dog smarter?" "Oh, she kept eating skill orbs," James explained. "And while I am at present woefully unequipped to tell you if uplifting dogs into fully sophaned peers is a good thing or not, or what the ethics of sparking new intelligent life forms is, I can tell you it is happening, and the reality we live in is one where I'm going to ask you to accommodate an individual who has the unique kitchen-hostile combination of no hands and yes fur, and that there will probably be more in the future." "Because you're going to uplift more dogs." Nate inhaled a long breath through his nose, chest out as he held his lungs full of air. Clicking his tongue as he shook his head, James answered coyly. Because more dogs are going to become uplifted. The passive voice is important because it means I don't have to panic yet. Get me my magic Roomba, Nate demanded, letting James go. Oh, you don't want that, James quickly replied. But I'll see what I can do for you. The only magic Roomba they knew about so far was a beetle-ish thing between 4 and 14 feet in diameter that moved at about 20 miles an hour and shredded anything living that it got its fangs into. Nate didn't want that. Well, okay, maybe he did want that. James was smart enough to admit that Nate wanted some weird things. As he trooped down the stairs, passing by a teenager hauling a heavy tarp up to a lobby, James acknowledged that Nate probably could get along with a hostile sentient Roomba. The lair had 6 stairwells in it, and one tiny door that led to a crawlspace no one used, because, due to an enthusiastic use of a specific magic effect, they had 6 basements and a tiny crawlspace that no one used. The one that was between the doors to the 2 upstairs bathrooms, that should have just led to the dividing wall between the 2 bathrooms, was the stairwell that James took now. It went down to basement 4, not that anyone was good at keeping track. Basement 4 had been one of the more open basements they'd gotten, like the basement of an industrial plant rather than the basement of a particularly cluttered middle school or the basement of a sprawling mansion estate. It had a couple large rooms, all hard concrete and 2 bright lights, ceilings of exposed ventilation and wiring, held up with thick concrete pillars that were sturdy enough that no one worried about the few long, thin cracks in them. They had used this floor, alternately, as a shooting range, a random magical artifact storage and testing site, and then as an engineering floor for the building and storing of a mech made out of asphalt, and creative uses of a lot of those earlier magical artifacts they'd been storing and testing. Technically, they still used one half for the storing of the mech, but the other side was getting a renovation. The Order of Endless Rooms had a problem. They had grown, over their time here, to a roster of over a couple hundred people, and a lot of those people lived in this building. Some because they liked it here, others because it was hard to get an apartment without citizenship documents or a human form. But, for whatever reason, the Order was interested in accommodating everyone they could. So they were building apartments. Or, more accurately, the work team that was down here day and night for the last week was building one apartment, to the highest degree of quality they could manage, and then a little better beyond that. And then they were going to activate a totem built around an orange orb pulled from Officium Mundi and copy that apartment a couple hundred times, layering the combined total space into this single room. The basement currently smelled like sawdust and plastic and a dozen other small flavors that came from construction sites. Loud music from a speaker set up behind the skeleton of the unit they planned to copy thumped through the air, and in the middle of the floor a small suite of rooms was slowly coming together. A construction that took into account the different styles of needs in terms of insulation and wiring and plumbing, designed not just to be uniform but to be copied. It was, all things considered, pretty cool. So the last time I trusted you with something like this, in this room, you blew up my car, James called to Reed as he got out of the stairs and skirted around the outside of the organized pile of materials laid out on blue construction tarps. Reed ignored him, partly because he was busy, but also because James had made that comment before, and his friend and possibly boss had taught him that repetitive comedy should not be rewarded. Instead, the curly-haired young man brushed some invisible sawdust off his shirt, winced as he put too much pressure on the scar that marked a missing internal organ, and pretended he was just really focused on getting the measurements right. And, to be fair, he was. The last time they had messed up some measurements, he'd blown up James's car, and his own kidney, among other things. The orange totems required exacting measurements, but once you had them, they were almost concerningly stable. And the blueprints that Bill and Mark had submitted for this project had been checked and rechecked, but he was still down here doing it again, while he watched one of the older men try desperately to teach a kid barely younger than he was how to use a belt sander. "Yo," James said, softer this time, stepping up to Reed's card table workstation. "How's it going?" Not bad, not bad," Reed nodded, choosing to begin acknowledging James now that the joking was done. Still wishing the unfolding totems could copy magical stuff. Oh, we finished the furniture test. It doesn't work. Doesn't care if it's a chair or a wall or whatever. The oranges won't copy magic. Disappointing, James tisked. But hey, this is still pretty powerful on its own. We'll just have to find other ways to really do arcane quality of life improvements. Centralization, I guess, Reed shrugged. Like how we stuck that microwave that adds nutritional content to things in the response break room. Oh, Mark wants you and Arash to be available for when we activate the totem so you can start setting up heat channels or something? I don't actually get the engineering method behind it, but he's basically got environmentally friendly air conditioning, so if you two can do the thing where you make a ring of heat exchange points, that'd be great. And it does collapse when we take the totem down. I checked, so no concern about, you know, making some kind of wizard minefield that lasts 1,000 years. Good? Good. James nodded. Yes, good. Except, hang on, we went to great lengths to get Mark a climb spell slot. I had to deal with his wife for a whole delve, and she was a better delver than he was. I remember. He has the thermodynamic tunnel spell. He can do it himself. He says he's old, Reed countered. He is 45 tops. I think he's almost 50. James blinked. Seriously? Shit, I did not realize that. Okay, well, that doesn't really stop him from doing the thing, but I can help out with it anyway. He gave an amused huff, breath coming out in a powerful burst, even when he didn't mean for it to. Alright, well, I'm just here to help with some random stuff today. I can gripe with you about having literal magic later. Random stuff? Reed questioned. James shrugged, casually looking over his shoulder and down the hall toward the elevator at the sounds of a group of Camercondas moving past. Bill said something about getting someone to hold heavy things. I can hold heavy things. I am very powerful. That's true, he is. A woman's voice cut into the conversation, scratchy from use and a little tired, but still enthusiastic. James turned with a grin of his own to see Alana coming toward them from out of the single half-built apartment unit in the middle of the basement's floor space. Very powerful, and other things, too. Alana circled the table and draped herself over James's shoulders, getting a grunt of exertion as he pushed back against the sudden weight. Alana was a half-foot taller than James. Hair pulled back in a tight ponytail that was nowhere near a match to his own, but gave her a certain sharp look anyway. She was wearing a plain t-shirt and shorts that showed off the tanned and heavily packed muscles that she was proud of working for, and was sweaty enough that she was incredibly uncomfortable to be fallen on by. James put up only a token resistance as his partner crushed his shoulders, though. "Oh, hey," he gasped out, shifting his stance to keep her from literally flooring him. "I guess Anesh left the note, then." "What? Oh, no, that was me. I just finished what I was doing early, and Bill roped me into lifting stuff into place from Miri to freeze." Alana jutted a thumb to where a black and orange Camerconda slithered out of the construction site, and James stifled a chuckle as the snake moved over to a line of large bowls full of water, dunking her head into one without reservation. "God, I keep forgetting they're waterproof," Alana muttered. James knew the feeling. It was hard enough to keep track of what he could do, and he'd been this species for his whole life, so far anyway. He tilted his head back as far as he could, wiggling in Alana's embrace, and tried to plant a kiss on her neck. Or escape. Either one. "So, wait, you stole my job?" he asked, as she repositioned above him, staying just out of reach of his antics. "I was supposed to help today." "You were on vacation. It's been 2 days." Alana glared down at him. "Also, yes, I was here and it seemed helpful. Also, Elle says hi." "No, she doesn't." James gave a disappointed smirk. "No, she doesn't," Alana admitted. "She said a lot of things, some of which were nice, though, so take the greeting and like it. Anyway, want to grab dinner?" "I just got here. I didn't even get a chance to do anything." Alana snorted at her boyfriend. "We're done for the day, and I know you need to eat something with vegetables in it before we go into the office tonight." "Oh, is it Tuesday already?" James innocently asked, like he didn't already know, and then yelped as his partner started gnawing on his ear in retaliation. "Alright, fine, but you have to tell me what we're postponing until tonight. I completely forgot." Alana laughed at him. Oh, nothing. I didn't think you'd be back today, so I left a note for any time in the future when you were feeling overwhelmed. James whirled away out of her grip and turned to place his hands on his partner's shoulders. That was very nice of you, he said solemnly. I love you very much. Please stop helping. I am helping, Alana exclaimed, throwing herself onto James for another sweaty hug, persisting with the laugh even as her boyfriend dodged her first attempt and led her on a chase back toward the stairs. A minute later, stopping at the card table that Reed was using, Bill cracked open a can of soda with a snap and a hiss. Was that James? He asked the younger man who was doing yet another check and not looking up from his laptop. Yep. With another hiss, Bill popped open a second can, grabbed a metal straw from a glass jar full of them on the side of Reed's table, popped it in, and lowered it to the ground so the camera conda that had followed him could also have a drink. Did James just walk away with my heavy? He asked. Yep, Reed nodded. Bill stared at the door, the man rolling the aluminum can in his thick hand, letting the cold metal soothe his fingers. After a few seconds, he tilted his head back and drained half the drink. God damn it, I'm gonna have to get an actual pulley system set up for the last support beam, he grumbled. Unless someone, anyone, made a totem that didn't need vertical support for its own interior weight? Nope, Reed shook his head. Well, fuck me then, Bill grumbled, chugging the last of the soda and flinging it into one of the open, heavy plastic trash bins that littered the site. Okay, I'm gonna go get the pulley system going. Is there any magic rope down here? Reed actually looked up for that one, thinking about the question. Surprisingly, no. I could make you something if you give me an hour. Nah, I'll figure it out. Bill grunted and rolled an arm. Alright, everybody back to work. I am a magic rope in some contexts, the camera conda, Miri, said from under the table where she had just finished her soda. Also, I am still on break. Be patient. Oh, Reed nodded, remembering what James and Alana had just been talking about. Speaking of breaks, Officium Monday opens tonight. If you're doing that, maybe take a rest. Bill waved him off. Nah, I'm going to my kid's soccer game in an hour. I leave the whole risking your life thing to you kids. Oh, not me kids. I leave that to James, Reed said, turning back to his laptop. He's the professional here. Upstairs, the professional dungeon delver, charged with reflex-enhancing magical coffee, caught a grape in his mouth as one of his partners kept throwing fruit at him when she thought he was distracted. At the tables around them, people of a dozen different backgrounds and roles ate, talked, and laughed, while James failed to predict the arc of a slice of orange properly and was sent tumbling to the floor. Together, they found strange places and explored them. They strove to understand and apply the magic they collected, they protected everyone they could find, and they worked to make the world a little safer. They built cool things and fought monsters and argued about systems of governance. They tried to be good people. Piece by piece, they built their own culture and their own place in the world. James was still grinning wildly as a rush helped him up off the floor, the towering rat roach, taller than Alana herself, bracing James with two of his arms while another hand hauled him to his feet. He gave a reassuring thumbs up to Alana, showing that he was actually fine as he dragged his chair back up as well. People kept trying to encourage everyone to take time off, to take a break, to take a vacation, even just take a weekend. But, really, how could James ever feel like he was relaxing away from here? This place had become his home. It wasn't pointless toil to work to make his home better. It wasn't burnout to spend time around the community he had built and he loved. James explained this to Alana, and then admitted that also, yes, he had cut his vacation short to go on a dungeon delve tonight, and got a laughing, "I knew it," out of his partner. But that didn't make the other stuff untrue either. It was, every time he walked through the door, good to be back.